Good morning.
It is.
Good morning, Bernie.
It's Wednesday, but it's not snowing here. Since it's daylight saving time, it's going to snow tomorrow.
Okay,
It's raining here.
it's raining here.
We have rain here.
This is
We
our
have
only. this was
sunny
my
and
only
almost
snow.
60.
Yeah,
Really?
well, what is it here? 56. And for you, that's amazing.
Yeah.
63.
Yeah, so.
There's Reva, there's Evelyn. Hello, Reva.
Hi. Hi,
Yeah,
everyone.
Morning, Evelyn.
Hi, how's everybody?
We're doing well.
That's
Wonder what
good.
hap- Wonder what happened to that Ellen lady from Ohio or whatever, remember? I think her name was
I
Ellen.
thought it was New Jersey.
New Jersey? Oh,
I don't
okay.
know. We'll have to ask Rabbi.
I think it was Baltimore or Maryland.
But
I thought it was Colorado.
Rabbi, where was Ellen from?
Maryland, maybe.
Okay.
Oh, there was another vote for Maryland.
You people would be terrible in identifying missing persons. I'm just saying.
All had a different state that she was from, Rabbi. It was over.
I know. How funny.
So good morning, everyone,
It is.
and welcome.
Well, actually, Shirley is an afternoon.
Right, 1 o'clock.
Okay.
1 o'clock her time.
Well, a good afternoon to you, Shirley.
Good afternoon.
Early morning. Bernie, what time is it at your place?
almost noon.
Oh, so you're later than us?
Yeah,
Everyone
no,
else everyone
earlier.
springs- yeah, everyone else springs forward and we stay the same.
Say
So
the same.
they were on mountain time and mountain time got to be,
Now it's Pacific time if you don't
yeah, we're on Pacific.
calculate, yeah, you don't calculate the,
That's how I think about it. Yeah.
anyway.
Oh, I said to Steve way back a few minutes ago that the reading today is so appropriate.
It would always be appropriate, no matter what.
I know, but the last few days have been, heck on wheels, so,
Hi, Don.
Last Wednesday, it was 86, and this week it's 47.
Woo!
Yes.
Okay. All
Well,
right,
it's the climate change.
yeah.
Prayer time?
Are you ready for us to start?
We are.
Okay, let us begin with the blessing.
2 minutes.
Ruach atah Eloheinu melech
Haolam,
asher
Asher
tzivanu v'tzivanu Torah. Blessed
Blessed are you,
Adonai,
our God,
ruler
ruler
of
of
the
the
world,
world, who has sanctified us with your commandments,
command us.
and
and
us to engage in
the
words.
works of Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, Rabbi, she's all yours, and Nan is just joining us as Sai as well.
Oh,
A nice
Sai,
group.
welcome back to you,
Welcome
Sai.
back, Sai.
Hey,
Yay!
Glad to see you.
hi, everybody.
Sai had surgery and rehab and all sorts of stuff, and look, he's in better shape than before. They're auctioning him and a Maserati off separately, and they expect that Sai will draw bigger bets.
No. I'll take this. I'll take the Maserati.
Good
As long as
morning.
it's a convertible.
And we have a new person.
It's
Nan,
Nan.
Oh, okay, there is
She's in
Nan,
the
not a
car.
new person.
no,
Okay, hi Nan, good morning. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
yes, ma'am.
Now we can, yeah.
Okay, I'm on my tablet, so
Okay.
I'm not home. I've got to try to get a different view.
Well, can you prop it up on a book and then it won't move?
No, right now I'm seeing only who speaks. I want to,
He wants to get full screen.
all the screens in, so I'm gonna figure out how
Full
to do
screen,
that.
it says.
That's on your view upper right.
Yep.
View, right.
There it says view.
Well, upper right is my
Oh,
little
you got a
square of
tablet.
a picture.
Yeah,
She's got a
So-
tablet, so I haven't got my tablet here, so I.
Yeah, I'm just, it'll take me a while, but I can hear, so.
okay, okay. Let us
Well, we
begin
can
then,
see
Rabbi.
you.
We see you. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay, so we are on Parak Gimel, Accountability of Public Officials, page 92. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
And I don't know where the Torah gets this idea that public officials should be accountable.
How you feeling?
But clearly, American and Israeli officials have not read this portion, and neither have the Russians, apparently. I did get an email from Putin saying that this is a misinterpretation, and that public officials are only accountable to themselves. And so he doesn't know what this portion is talking about. So we'll have to see. Do we have any opening comments? We want to keep it as apolitical as possible, as always. So you don't want to talk too specifically. We do probably want to talk in general terms a little bit about what's going on in Israel, but try to avoid, I guess, the difference between analyzing a situation and becoming overtly partisan is a difference, even in Israeli politics. So to make comments that are based upon a reasonable, rational, logical analysis is fine. It's at least in terms of Israel, and making comments that are just personal and subjective are not. With American politics, we want to be even more careful and to avoid, we don't want to start any fights.
Well put, well put.
So let's get a few brief opening comments. Marcia and her son David and I had a very delightful coffee last week, and that was a lot of fun. Marcia.
Where does it says in the Torah, where does it say in the Torah that Moses kept accounts? Did I miss something?
Where you're basing yourself on something in this text?
Yes, it says,
Where?
somewhere, it's the very beginning, let's see, so, repeat descriptions of the Torah portion, including long detailed lists of items donated by the Israelites. Is that really so? The very big first sentence.
All right, so let's read it. The Torah portions, Vayakel Pekude. So we're talking about a double portion, at least in the Harvey Fields version. Repeat descriptions of sanctuary construction, including long detailed lists of items donated by the Israelites. So this is referring to, that there was certain skins and certain metals and certain construction that were donated by different people.
So they kept a list of who gave what, actually?
Well, they had a list of what was given. I don't know that, it says there exactly who gave it. So let's see if I can find.
It was confusing to me that they would keep such a list. That's why I asked the question.
So at the beginning of Vayakel, it says we're in the book of Exodus, chapter 35, verse 10. Every wise-hearted person among you shall come and make everything that God has commanded: the tabernacle, its tent, its cover, its hooks, its planks, its bars, its pillars, and its sockets, the ark and its staves, the cover, the partition curtain, the table, its staves, and all its utensils, and the showbread, the menorah of illumination, its utensils and its lamps, and oil for the illumination, the incense altar and its staves, and it goes on and on. And it goes all the way from verse 10 to verse 19, at least.
Yeah, and then on 30, I'm just scanning out. It just goes on and on about the list of stuff. But on 30, it talks of Bezalel and son of Uri, son of Uri.
But Bezalel is the artisan. He's not the donor.
Oh, okay.
So that's like Chagall made the windows. So it doesn't list every person that donated.
Yeah, that's the question I was asking, because that sentence there leads you to believe that he was doing a donor list,
Well, he may have, it just may not be in the Torah, like,
Yeah, but this says it was in the Torah, so I just.
where does it say it was in the Torah?
It says the Torah portions, including, well, it doesn't say that. You're
It
right.
doesn't, it says a
I
long
am.
list of donations and how they were used, but it doesn't list donors.
Okay.
Now they must have kept lists themselves. Now, in our case, when we built our temple, which is before anyone was here, a lot of people had naming opportunities. So you'll notice the social hall is in honor or in memory of someone. And there, even in the lobby, there's a plaque listing certain things that were donated by certain people.
Yeah.
So, according to Maimonides, of course, the highest form of donation is anonymous. But that's not something that I feel is necessary. If someone's going to give the temple $10,000 or $40,000 or some, relatively, significant amount, I don't see why they shouldn't be able to dedicate whatever in memory of a loved relative. I think that's very respectful. I mean,
So basically what I'm seeing there is that he's recording what came in so that they know what they have. It's not so much who gave what, is what I'm guessing at this point. So
but in later Jewish tradition, there was this idea that if you, and then in Orthodox synagogues, they'd auction off the aliyot. So even on a Shabbat morning, there's 7 or 8 aliyot, just to bless the Torah. And they'd say, Mr. Schwartz will give $50 or $100 for the 4th aliyah, and they'll announce this in front of everybody. So, sign.
Rabbi,
I was
when,
curious.
Wait,
first-
Evelyn.
Evelyn.
when I first joined the temple in 19,
Steve,
Whoa.
I need order here.
I know.
Yeah.
Evelyn, let's wait till Cy gets done and then let's make sure we raise our hands. Don't interrupt, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Sai.
I was curious as to whether in ancient Israel, the priest had a special economic dispensation.
For
Well, he was the one in charge of in the temple, and he was getting all the sacrifices and all the monies and so forth. And how did he handle it? And who was he responsible to?
well, my great grandfather was a Kohen in the temple there, and the Kohen Gadol was in charge of all the Kohanim, and he divvied up all the booty, all the meats and all the stuff. A certain percentage of what came in was burnt to the god, and a certain percentage was given to the Kohanim. And so the high priest was responsible for distributing that to all the Kohanim. So now who supervised the Kohen Gadol? I guess God. There's got to be someone where the buck stops here, right? That for better or worse, that there was no not to raise the Israel issue, where the courts are supposed to oversee the legislature, because the feeling was you couldn't trust the legislature. Does that answer your question, Si?
Yes.
Okay, Evelyn.
apropos of your comment of donating for aliyahs, when I first joined the temple in early 1984, and the custom continued for several years, you were requested to perform an aliyah, but you were also expected to make a donation when you had an aliyah. And that custom continued for several years. And they didn't lack for people wanting to have an aliyah, people who had yurt sites. And so it was, shall we say, a source of income, a steady source of income at the time.
Yes, the good old days. Okay, let's, Pam, would you have any opening comments? Okay. Anyone else? Okay, who'd like to read? Minya, do you want to help us out here?
Sure. On page 90,
Page 92,
sorry, I was on the
Eric
wrong.
Gimmel, the
Accountability.
accountability of public officials.
The Torah portions by Akel Pekudi, Repeat.
Pekude.
Pekude. Repeat descriptions of the sanctuary construction, including long detailed lists of items donated by the Israelites. Biblical interpreter Don Isaac Abravanel counts 5 repetitions of building plans and donation lists within the Torah. The matter is puzzling, says Abravanel. Why keep on recapitulating such details?
Mhm.
Commentator Rabban answers Abravanel by claiming that all the repetition reflects the love with which the sanctuary was viewed by God. Such repetition is designed to underscore its importance in the hearts of the Israelites. On the other hand, modern commentator Umberto Cassuto suggests that all the duplication is merely a matter of style. Ancient Middle Eastern documents, he claims, all contain repetitions of details, especially plans describing the sacred places of worship. Early rabbinic commentators disagree with Cassuto. They believe that the details and lists serve a very important function. Moses, they say, carefully records each charitable gift. Afterwards, he reviews the contribution and checks his list against others made by Bezalel and Oholiab. Then he rechecks each entry, making sure that none has been overlooked or misplaced. All this repetition, attention to detail, and recapitulation of what was given and how it was used is a matter of accountability. For Moses, the rabbis observe accountability by public officials of what they collect and how they use it is a moral responsibility. Public officials must be beyond reproach.
Ah, ha, ha, ha. One more paragraph. Or
Furthermore,
two more paragraphs.
rabbinic commentators teach that at least 2 people are to be appointed to look after the finances of a community. They point out that in the case of Moses, he was acting alone. And for this reason, he insisted on having all the accounts he supervised publicly audited by the people. The repetition of the long lists of donations and how they were used, the rabbis maintain, was the actual public examination of Moses's records. Why did Moses insist on such accountability? Was he not the trusted leader of the people? Could
There's
anyone have-
always those, you know?
Mhm.
There's always those who look to, you know, whether it's the downfall of the leader or, you know, or dissuade the public from questioning his accounts.
Okay, let's make sure that everyone raises their hand first. Okay, we don't want to interrupt. Thank you.
Could anyone have thought that he was misusing public charity?
Okay, good. So, Pam,
Question, what language is Moses writing down this list?
you know, my personal opinion, he was writing in Egyptian, but in theory in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew.
Not
Why?
not Aramaic?
No, the Israelites at this point were using biblical Hebrew. Most of them were not literate, but the ones that could write and read were using biblical Hebrew. some of them must have known Egyptian as well, especially Moses. But why do you ask, Pam?
I'm just curious because we often talk about what they say, but we don't often talk about what they write or how they write it.
Well, that's, I mean, of course, if you're following critical biblical studies, these texts were written, in the 7th or 8th century. So they were written maybe 600 years after the time of Moses. So Moses would not have written anything. This was all written down much later. But that would be heretical, and I wouldn't want you to report me to the Rabbinical Association. But do I think, if you're asking me, did Moses actually write this stuff down? No. I think this was all written down much, 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 much later. Sai.
How long after Moses dies is the first temple built?
Good question. Presuming that Moses lived, the Exodus is usually regarded as having occurred in the 13th century BCE, which would, let's say, rounding it off, would be about 1250 before the year 0. The first temple was built around the year 1000, so it's around 250 years.
I was curious as to where did the architects come from in relation to building the temple?
Oh,
Was this a contractual kind of a thing, and who was responsible and so forth?
now the word Jerusalem, as you may know, does not appear in the Hebrew Bible, in the 5 books of Moses, right? I was watching some YouTube videos last night about the Samaritans, who are our cousins, and the Samaritans believe the word Mount Gerizim does appear, and the Samaritans believe that we are making a mistake, that we built the temple in Jerusalem. The temple should have been built on Mount Gerizim, which is to the north. But of course, the Jewish leadership did not agree with that. So now, where did they get the architect? I mean, this was a map according to the Torah. This is and to the Tanakh. This is a mammoth building project, building the temple. Where they got the architects and everything, that's a question for another day. Today we're focusing on accountability, but it's a fascinating one. Certainly the tabernacle, which was a portable one, was much, much, much more modest. But even then, you see how much they had to make. They had to make, this and this and this. Is a long list of things that had to be made. And each one needed donations. So the tradition of requesting donations is a long one. Marcia.
So you snuck something in there. Well, a few paragraphs ago. That could get you even in more trouble.
Uh-oh. What did I say, Marcia?
Presuming Moses lived.
Oh, I didn't say that.
No? Okay.
You misheard me. Nobody heard you.
Oh, okay.
Except for you.
It must just a delusional thing, I guess. Okay.
But we're not going to get into that. But what we are going to get into is this whole issue of accountability. I have a friend who was rabbi in the Midwest, and he had a discretionary fund where he had the checks and everything, and there's a lot of money in there. And I don't know exactly what happened, but he was accused of misusing it, and he destroyed all the evidence for where things went, and he got expelled from the CCAR as a result. So I stay very far away from that sort of thing. So I don't have a checkbook for the discretionary fund, which here has very little money into it anyway, but little money, or doesn't matter if it's $1 or $1 million, you don't want to be accused of misappropriating it in any way or shape or form. And in Alabama, where there was a much larger one, I submitted a request for reimbursement. I told the treasurer what it was. And I said, you decide if it's fits the terms of the discretionary fund. If it does, reimburse me. If it doesn't, don't. So I felt that covered me because, the treasurer and the executive director, and I don't know, maybe one or two other people were all, watching what I did. And I was very clear, reimburse, don't reimburse, your choice based on what you think is appropriate. So if anyone would say, you took reimbursement for this, I said, but I have an email. I said, if it's appropriate, reimburse me. If it's not, don't. So, that covered me, so, but you have to be very careful. And, if you're trying to be careful and you're trying to avoid getting trouble, presumably you can avoid getting into trouble. But if you're trying to steal money, then and I guess you can get in trouble that way. Bernie.
This puzzles me because the very definition of the fund says that the rabbi has discretion over how it's used. And why should the rabbi have to be accountable for that money?
Oh, okay. Well, then if it's like that and the rabbi can do anything they want, then if that's clearly I guess that was not the guiding principles of it. I don't know. My goal was just to avoid any, not only impropriety, but any appearance of impropriety. And this is important as well. You don't want to look guilty, even if you're not, right? So if, there's a lot of ways that can happen, right? So you may not do anything wrong, but you don't want people going around saying you did something wrong. Of course, people, if they want to, they'll make up things completely out of whole cloth, but you don't want to do things that could lead to a reasonable person casting aspersions on how you're using money. And it should be easy enough to do, but I guess it depends on the situation, depends on the culture. And clearly Moses is worried about this as well, right? So he doesn't want anyone saying, and people did attack Moses quite often, right? His leadership was questioned on various grounds. So he doesn't want to give people a grounds to question his ethical use of money. And money is something that people fight about more than almost anything else, I guess, right?
Except religion.
Well, maybe, I don't know. Other comments? Nan, B? Nan, are you concerned with how people spend money? Not so much. There was a terrible case in Georgia. They built a brand new synagogue right before I got there. And the president, the guy who'd been president, was an architect, and he donated, through his company, huge amounts of money, into the six figures for the building, which was a magnificent structure. And one guy came and accused him of stealing money. I mean, it was so preposterous that it was sad, that, eventually the guy was, reprimanded and so on, but it's very hurtful, and he had all the records and everything. It wasn't like he was doing things serendipitously, but still, it's so easy to accuse people of financial impropriety, even when there's, mountain loads of evidence to the contrary. So, you just have to try to be careful as much as possible. In our temple, of course, any check, we have our Saturday morning guitar service, which I urge all of you to consider coming. It's in a private home in Sun City Grand, and it's this Saturday. It's once a month. And so we give a check to the guitarist. So that check has to be signed by two officers of the temple, specific people, 2, not just 1. And part of that is you don't want, one officer starting to write checks to people, because it's easy to have problems that way. And indeed, in Australia, I was a student rabbi there for two years, 2 summers. And 3 or 4 years after my last time there, the treasurer, who I knew and who was the treasurer when I was there, had a gambling problem, and he quote unquote borrowed from the treasury basically all the money in the temple's accounts. And he was planning to replace it when he won, at the tables. And he did. Of course, you don't usually win. And so he disappeared, and so did the savings account of the temple. So, anything that can be done to prevent those sorts of things from happening, are very important. Okay, Cy, and then if Evelyn wants to say something.
Not at the moment, thank you.
Okay.
I think it's interesting that the people who wrote the Bible put all these responsibilities on Moses. Now he's become the chief financial officer.
Right.
He was the chief operating officer. He was the chief religious officer.
Right.
And he was the guy who could only talk to God. I mean, he's a pretty busy fellow. And there's no help. And I wonder about that. Why do they keep putting all this on him?
Well, I think it's sort of like what I've experienced here. This temple has had the least structure of any temple I've been in. And so I kind of pulled myself into doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, in terms of what an executive director would do, because there is no executive director. I hear a feedback somewhere.
That's me, that's Marcia. I'm gonna try to get out of this.
So it's not so. Oh, there you are. Wait, there's 2 Marcia Gratz.
It's 2 Marcias. I'm trying. Okay.
Marcia Gratz has
All right, I
successfully-
fixed it. Okay, I
Marcia,
lost the connection.
You
That's what-
successfully cloned yourself. Wow.
I did. Okay.
But I think what happened with Moses, what happened with me, is there's nobody to do it. So Moses having a lot of desire to make it successful, started doing it because nobody else could do it. Remember again, Moses is from a very upper class, educated family. His step-parents were the royalty in Egypt. He'd gone to one of the best business schools in Egypt. He got an MBA and a degree in administration in preparation for becoming a big shot in the royal court before he did a career change and had a little falling out with his stepfather. So he was one of the few people, if not the only person, who was capable of this sort of thing. So he did it. But it's ridiculous, he's doing 4 or 5 different jobs. And that can't end well. Okay, Minya, back to you.
Apparently, that is the impression the rabbis believe Moses wanted to avoid. There are gossips in every community, those who spread false rumors or question the integrity of public servants. Moses realized, say the rabbis, that there were those who pointed at him and said, "Look how well he's eating and drinking. He's living off our money. He's getting rich from our donations." In order to answer such false rumors and gossip, Moses insisted that his accounting books be public and open to all the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
The rabbis also claim that when Moses realized that people were giving more than Bezalel and Oholiab required for the building of the sanctuary, he asked God, what should be done with the surplus gifts? God instructed him to build a special chapel inside the sanctuary. When it was complete, Moses reported to the people, "We spent this amount on the sanctuary, and with the additional funds, we built the chapel." Because he accounted for all the gifts, even the additional ones, Moses placed himself above suspicion.
Our congregation also is getting more gifts than we need. I'm joking, but this is a very nice position to be in, where they actually had more donations than they needed, and they could do an additional project. Of course, you could say, no, maybe they should have offered an option to the donors. Do you want this chapel, or should we return the excess funds? In our case, we would probably try to direct it to the endowment, which has been whittled down to almost nothing, and we're trying now to rebuild. But these are financial decisions, and the first question, I guess, is who makes these decisions, and what is the process, the proper process for making these decisions? And so I guess you'd have, in a temple, a president would appoint a group and give a very detailed written description of what their job was to do and how much authority they had, whether it would need to be approved by the executive committee or not, and so forth, so that everyone's clear what they're supposed to do and what are the limits of their authority. And so that's how you would probably proceed. Comments? Minya?
I have a question. In those days, what was the method of communication with people outside of the immediate circle who lived close enough to listen to Moses when he was speaking to them? There were people who lived way out. They couldn't have all lived in the same in the same area, especially if there were 600,000 of them. So how did the information get out there? There was no, obviously, technology that we have today. So was it based on just the people who were in the immediate listening area, and then the other people just didn't know about it?
How do you want me to answer this question? Anything I might say, Marcia is sitting there with her ears perked up, like my dogs, their ears go up, and she's waiting for me to slip up again and say something not kosher. But well, I'm not gonna be very careful what I say. So, you could argue that there was a system of transmission, and that Moses said to the certain group of 200 or whatever, and they passed it on to others. You could say that it was just the elite that made the decision. There's nothing here that said this was a democratic process, is there? I mean, clearly Moses wants to consult with someone, and he doesn't want to be accused of doing things that are unethical, but I don't see anywhere where they say that 51% have to vote in favor. He's really just concerned with a small group of the elite who are watching him and have the power and perhaps the education to fight with him over these things. The average person presumably is barely making it through the desert. They've got their knapsack and their tent, and they're not really concerned with what the big shots are saying and doing. Marcia.
You have to unmute.
Sorry. And also, I keep losing the connection, so if I'm going in and out, I'm sorry. What was I gonna say? At some point, his father-in-law told him to delegate. He was swamped, right?
Right.
And I would imagine he did have people
That
represent.
was the delegating in terms of the courts, in terms of judgments in courts.
Would
right?
he not have had representatives from different subgroups in the community who maybe got together at a holiday time or something like that? And he would say, oh, we're just building a chapel because we had extra money or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it might, but the structures that you're describing happened. Here he was talking about court systems. Moses, it just sort of happens, and then you end up with an unmanageable situation. So they're trudging through the desert, and some guy steals somebody else's blanket. So they go to Moses, and the guy says, you see that red blanket there? That's mine. That guy stole it. And Moses then would try to mediate or judge or whatever. Then as this became more common, there was started to be a long line. And at some point, his father-in-law said, you can't do all this. You've got to build this. So you don't sit down the day after the Exodus and say, oh, we need a court system. It comes in response to the demand. There's too many people to handle. And it's like that with the administration of the finances as well. I would imagine that Moses probably had 2 or 3 friends, and they handled all the finances. Then suddenly all these donations are coming in for the tabernacle. It's like you run a small business. So you're a handyman, and you're retired, and you do a few, or when I was in Australia, I went up to the Great Barrier Reef, and there was a guy there, an American guy, and he had a big glass company in Las Vegas and retired, and then he'd moved up there, and then he'd realized that there was no big glass companies that could make custom-made glass. So he made a few things for a few people, and before you know it, he had a big business going. So you have to ramp up your administration in response to demand. But there's always that period when you're realizing you've got more going on than you can handle, where there's this, you're out of control. And then then you hire people, and then you are okay again. Does that answer your comment? Is there anybody, Pam, Bernie, Cy, Steve Siegel, Shirley, Donna, who'd like to, Babette? Everybody's quiet. Nobody wants to be accused of financial impropriety. Okay. Minya, back to you.
Do you want me to read the box?
Yes.
Stealing. It is better to eat a poor person's meal and be respected as honest than to eat the richest meal and be hated for swindling and cheating others. Stealing is the worst of all sins. Collecting and distributing charity. Collecting charity for the poor must be done by at least 2 people jointly. It is to be distributed by a committee of 3 to assure just criteria and fairness. If collectors of charity must make change or invest surplus funds, they must do so with others present so that no one may suspect them of deriving personal benefit from their transactions.
Okay. Comments about these 3 quotes, or these 3 quotes.
This is not in the Torah, though, right?
None of them are in the Torah. The first one is from Senorena. Senorena is a Yiddish commentary on the Torah that was written by a man for women in Yiddish. It's very famous. So it was the most widely read Torah commentary in Eastern Europe, and it stressed the simple things because women were regarded as simple creatures. The other 2 are from the Talmud. But the Senorena has some very interesting things in it. So as this one is.
Rabbi, you got 2 people with hands up.
Okay, Pam and then Bernie.
Rabbi, can you explain the stealing one? I don't understand what they're trying to say in this one about stealing.
It is better to eat a poor person's meal and be respected as honest than to eat the richest meal and be hated for swindling and cheating others. In other words, if people are going to suspect you, that if you are seen every night eating in the most expensive restaurant, and people are going to say that you obviously, cheated people, and that's how you got all this money to eat every night in such an expensive restaurant, then it's better to eat in the cheapest restaurant, even though the food will be awful, because you don't want people to say that you may have been cheating and stealing. Of course, and if you're actually stealing money in order to afford this fancy restaurant, that's even worse. But I don't think it's saying that you're necessarily doing that. It's saying that if people are going to accuse you of it, then better to eat poor than to be accused of it. Does that sound okay?
Okay, thank
Bernie and
you.
then Steve.
You're muted,
You have to unmute Bernie.
you know.
He's working on it. He's an engineer.
All right. What bothers me about this whole thing is that the authors must have lived in a time of extreme cases of thievery.
Right.
If they're so concerned about every little thing like this, making a big deal out of trying to show everybody that you're honest by being poor.
Steve's turn. Yeah.
That's I mean, and it's now everything is documented there. You know, every government office has, you know, records, and there's a paper trail, there's a computer trail. You know, they can go back years later and try to figure out. Then everything was just, here's some money and what do we do with it? So they're you know, basically, if you were seen as eating in a fancy restaurant all the time, this may be legitimate money, but you wouldn't be able to prove it really. And the people weren't literate. Even if you could prove it, they wouldn't understand. So the perception becomes more important than the reality almost.
Why would I care?
Well, that's what they're saying, is that you should care because you don't want people to think that you're stealing.
That's their problem.
Right, it's a different, all right, it's a different approach, right? You
He's
know,
going for the steak.
the writer of the Cenorena is concerned with how you are perceived, even if people are wrong, and even if people are ignorant, you want to do the behavior that will put you above reproach in all circumstances. Bernie is saying, I want to behave properly, but once I behave properly, and even I can even prove I behave properly, then I should be able to eat in a fancy restaurant if I want to. You know, what, you know, I can't live my life, you know, I keep all the records, but once I do that, there's no reason I'm gonna, every time I go out, I have to, you know, wear dumpy clothing just so people don't accuse me of something that's not true. All right, there's two ways to look at it, I guess. It depends on the society. Steve and then Cy,
Okay,
and then Evelyn.
since it states in the box, stealing is the worst of all sins, who forgives these individuals who have stolen goods? Who forgives them? Is it the priests, or is it the judges, or is
Well,
it God?
this is the Eastern Europe about 150 years ago. So you would, you know, have the normal tshuva process. If you actually stole, then, you know, you'd have to make it up to them and give them back their money to wherever you stole it from, and apologize to them and so forth.
Okay.
But I think the emphasis here is not really on the action itself. You may not have actually stolen. It's more about the perception. You want to avoid a situation where people start gossiping about you, even if it's not true, right?
Right.
So, you know, you know, does that answer your question, Steve?
No.
All right, ask it again.
Who during that period, who would forgive these sinners who stole?
The period of the Cenorena when
Yeah.
this comment was written?
Yes.
Well, it would be like today, you know, it was 150 years ago. So you know, if you actually stole from the public, from the synagogue's treasury, let's say, you'd have to go to the officers of the synagogue and say, I stole money when I was treasurer 3 years ago. and I stole 150 Eastern European coins, and here they are. I'm returning them, and I want to. Here's a public apology in writing and verbally. And I'm terribly sorry, and I promised all you I would never do this again. And then I'm gonna sincerely try to do volunteer work that does not involve stealing money to make up for it. All the things that we would do today.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, who was next? I think it was Cy, and then Evelyn, and then Babette.
I like to think that over the hundreds and hundreds of years, as the Torah was written, it included the thinking of all the individuals who wrote in it. And everybody had their own ideas as far as righteousness, morality, godliness, and so forth. And they included their own thinking, the thinking that they felt was meaningful to the whole concept of Judaism. And then as time goes on, they managed to make Moses, in a lot of cases, responsible for all these ideas and all this thinking. But that's not what really happened. Everybody had his own ideas, and today we have people still putting in new ideas, perhaps not written, but there's always new ideas in Judaism.
Marcia, did you hear Cy?
No, I understand. There's growth, yes.
Evelyn, and then Babette, and then Riva.
Okay, my feelings are, since stealing is one, or actually the edict against stealing is part of the 10 Commandments, the fact that those of the elites who were aware of the fact that people had a propensity to steal if the opportunity arose. And therefore, that was why they said that collecting must be done by 2 people, not by 1, thinking that one would counterbalance the other and prevent any possible collusion. However, then it says a committee of 3 to assure just criteria and fairness. I think the thinking there is that if there are 2 people who are in collusion with each other, it is unlikely that the third one would go along with it. And so the feeling is that it would be more fair to have that third individual. It's checks and balances, essentially. You are preventing something by having these extra persons who agree or disagree on how the money should be distributed. And I think these last 2 paragraphs on distributing charity is, again, a system of checks and balances so that the base nature of humans, in other words, the tendency to grab an opportunity to steal whatever it is, if the opportunity shows up, this can be tempered, ameliorated by having these extra people who participate in the collection.
Okay, and so Evelyn and I might decide we're going to take some of the money and divide it up. But once we have Pam on this little committee, Pam says, what? And we said, well, we'll share it with you 3 ways. And Pam says, what? And she could put a wrench in the whole deal. So it's always easier to be corrupt with 2 than with 3. Okay, who is next? Babette, Riva, and then Marcia.
Well, I want to know about the punishment for bearing false witness. Those that are accusing somebody else of doing something they shouldn't. If it's proved that the party was innocent, what goes to the people who keep trying to stir up trouble, who are bearing false witness? Is there punishments for them?
Problem, because in many cases the people know that what they're saying is not true. They don't care, and once these accusations are made, it doesn't really matter so at least in synagogues, I've found that people will, they'll make trivial accusations. It doesn't have to be something big. And it doesn't even have to be something that's not appropriate. They could just say something negative. And if they can spread negativity, you're doomed. And so there's I guess God may punish these people in the next world, but it's very difficult because
Well, do they lack credibility after a while if they're those that are looking to bear false witness?
no,
Saying people are stealing and they're not?
well, if people say nasty things, it usually builds rather than dissipates. And then they quickly then disengage, so it's not really, blamed on them. So it's a very, of course, it's a very, very bad thing to do. And, it's definitely a horrible thing to do, but it's a very easy thing to do, and it's an easy thing to get away with. And that's why, going back to Bernie's case, they're saying better to eat the poor in the worst restaurant so that nobody can claim that you're stealing money to eat in the rich restaurant, because it's so easy to people say, look at that guy. He's eating in, the fancy steakhouse every night. He's stealing from the synagogue treasury. And there's really, or they don't have to say he's stealing. They can just kind of say, I wonder where all that money's coming from. They can cast vague aspersions, and it's impossible, they're not actually accusing him of anything directly. So it's a very hard situation. And that's why the Senorena says the only way you can really counterbalance that is to avoid giving people any ammunition. But that's hard to do. It requires you to live in a way that is very, very, very discreet. And after a while, you want to go to a nice restaurant, So as Bernie made very clear, it's hard to be a public figure of any type. Okay, so the Riva and then Marcia.
Yeah, I like this. And I respect the thoughtfulness of all of our ancestors. I think the overall message is, for the benefit of all society, you need to have safeguards in place to protect those people who are tempted to rob and those people who are vulnerable to being robbed, or those organizations that might be vulnerable to being robbed. And that is, you put these safeguards in place so that you don't tempt people who want to get more of whatever, or who might be very poor. And you don't, and so that protects those people who are poor, because they're not faced with temptations all the time that are not guarded in some way. And those people or those organizations that have these resources to protect them from being ripped off.
Mm-hmm. So how would you avoid problems occurring, Riva?
I think as an individual, we shouldn't, for example, all of us, I'm sure, teach our children that when you go into a store, you don't display a lot of money in your wallet, because it might be tempting to other people. I think I teach this to my kids. If you have money with you nowadays, I guess a lot of people have plastic, but that you don't leave things exposed that are temptations to other people.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, like, I went to a supermarket a few months ago and I realized I had an apple in my pocket in my sweatshirt that I'd bought there. So on the way in, I went to one of the tellers and I showed her the apple and I said, I'm bringing this apple in with me. So nobody later could, would they accuse me of stealing one apple? And I could go and get the receipt and, but this was a way to ensure or hopefully ensure that nobody would accuse me of anything.
Yeah, I had a neighbor who left diamonds out in a very public place and had people coming into her house to do some work. And the diamonds disappeared. But I think the person who was robbed also should take responsibility for the fact that she left these things very visible to people
She
who
just
might be
left
tempted.
She left diamonds like on a table and.
It was
had
her
work-
wedding ring and stuff like that, you know.
And left it not in a vault or somewhere locked up.
No, it was in a
Yeah.
very public place and she was having her house painted.
Why did she do that?
She was foolish.
No.
Remember,
No.
diamonds is a help's best friend.
Yeah, well, I had workmen in my place and 3 of my Jewish history books disappeared.
Really?
And I'm convinced that one of those workmen must have stolen them. Marcia,
I understand why we have this in here, but I think that Senator Rena,
right?
okay, I think it was being simplistic and very talking down to women.
All right,
Stealing
that's
is not,
what Santa Rena is. Yes,
stealing is not the worst of all sins, first of all. But
Santa
it's
Rena is exaggerating for the purposes of teaching simple women
right,
basic moral lessons by hitting them over the head.
right. But hitting over the head might be the worst of all sins. So, so I don't think that that's, and I think it's kind of really very misogynistic. So that's what I have to say about
Oh,
that.
my. But you can't say that because you're talking about such a different period of time.
That's
You know,
true.
that
Oh,
this
those
was-
women were less likely to be, more likely to steal than to kill somebody. So they wanted them to have guilt. So there you go.
And you can't say today that people 200 or 600 years ago were bad because they behaved the way that people 600 years ago behaved. That's, what is that called when you do that? That's called, there's a word in history where you use your, what you know today, and
Reflect, yeah.
you judge people from previous periods based on what you know today. You can't do that.
I'm sure stealing was probably much more prevalent then because the need was so much greater at that point. People,
I think Santa Rena is more emphasizing the need to avoid actions that might lead others to gossip that you are potentially stealing. I don't think that here he's trying to say don't steal. I think he's more saying don't do things that might lead people to gossip about you, to say you're stealing.
right.
Marcia, response?
No, I
Reva?
agree. You're probably, yes, I understand that. But I do think that that particular writing was probably so simplistic towards women at that time.
Reva, response to Marcia?
Yeah, I just think there are two issues we're talking about here. One is theft or tempting other people, and the other one is bearing false witness.
Right. And our topic this week is the first of the two. More. But they connect, right? Moses,
Sure.
getting back to our Parsha, Moses is worried about the appearance of he wants to be accountable, and he doesn't want anyone thinking he might be misacting. Bernie.
This darn thing keeps getting hidden by the clicker thing. I'm a little bit curious about why Harvey Fields chose this to present to us as a learning experience anyway, because while these things may have been valid 200 or 2,000 years ago, they're not so valid today. So I don't know
Why?
how they project in today's world.
Okay, so things have changed.
Right.
I don't think so.
And
so.
therefore, today, it's more acceptable to eat in fancy. Bernie, we're quite happy to have you eat in a fancy restaurant. Don't,
Thank you.
especially in Denver, we can't even see where you're going.
The trouble is that I get my meals here, and when I go out with my kids, they have to eat in places that are friendly for people with gluten allergy and vegetarians, so I don't get to eat in the fancy restaurants
Oh.
anyway.
This is what
Sad.
this is what it comes down to, is Bertie's really resentful that he can't live it up. Riva, was that a hand?
Yeah, just quickly, I think the essential messages are meaningful and useful. However, the examples are, some of them are terrible.
Yeah, okay. I didn't write it. Shirley.
Yeah, let me give you a good example of something that's going on here right now. The person who's in charge of our ethics committee was also in charge of distributing scholarships to underprivileged young people to go to college. And lo and behold, his two daughters are now going to college on scholarships from that money. And
Oh my
he's being prosecuted. But he's the head of the ethics committee. This is not just an office, this is the ethics committee, who did
That's
something
why-
so unethical as to give his two kids scholarships. I mean,
Chutzpah.
Are you talking about the city of Mobile or the synagogue?
I think
no, the state of Alabama.
State of Alabama. Well, that's why some people join these kind of committees, so that they can make sure that worthy candidates are rewarded. And who's
Did he-
more worthy than your own children?
How could he not think his children was going to be found out that his kids had scholarships to go with his money from the ethics committee?
I wonder if
And
he
so-
would know it.
Not too bright.
Well, when you're inside things, you don't really look at it the same way. What seems to an outsider to be really stupid, from an insider looked very logical, and you couldn't resist.
Well,
Donna? Steve?
Yes.
Donna, anything?
Not really. I find it very interesting and part of the Torah that I have just never really read and thought a whole lot about. So I think it's interesting.
Keep
The
seeing the
first-
tail go by.
The person that does the accusing of somebody, he better be right. He better have some real points there. Now I guess you could really have a problem in the synagogue with one person accusing and the other one denying. So
Now, in Israel, you have a public prosecutor who accused the prime minister, the former prime minister, now back, he's the current prime minister, of 3 separate crimes of bribery, different cases.
right.
And so this is, and now the parliament, the Knesset, is in the process of hearing a potential law or decision to give him immunity to prosecution, and that can pass without any legal justification if it gets a majority. So it certainly, though, has the potential to create a very negative impression that some people in Israel are above the law if they can get enough power and get enough people, and basically give out enough public funds to minority parties, that mostly from the ultra-Orthodox, in exchange for them voting for him to have immunity from prosecution for crimes that most Israelis think that he committed. But no government is immune from the perception of such miscarriages of justice. Comments? Steve, Pam, Babette. Donna?
Yeah, years ago, when he was prime minister, he was accused of spending the money to furnish his private homes. on the coast. And that that went on and on and on. That they spent lovely porch furniture and furniture throughout their private home. Now that never came to anything that was decided for sure, but it was highly he was highly accused.
And this comes back to what Shirley said. Why would the head of the State Ethics Commission do this, knowing that the recipients of this scholarship are going to be publicly named, and then everyone's going to know it's his own kids? And with Prime Minister Netanyahu, why would he spend money on refurbishing his private home for public funds? Why would he spend money? There was another case earlier where his wife spent apparently, $250,000 on a private caterer, on private meals delivered from fancy restaurants when the government was paying for a full-time private chef. And, why would you do this knowing they're going to come out? I think because when you're inside it, it looks okay. It looks like this is resources that are being provided to us. We might as well use them. From the outside, Shirley said, but how could he do that? It's so obvious he was going to get caught. But for him, it probably was not obvious that he would get caught, or that maybe that he knew it would be public knowledge, but he didn't think anyone would really look at it badly.
Yeah.
And that's why the Senorena was telling Bernie, don't eat in fancy restaurants, even if it's your money, because you have to be so careful not to give people anything that they can, gossip about and accuse you of, even completely without merit. Who's next? Marcia and anyone else? Pam first, and Pam and then Marcia.
Okay.
I think that people aren't worried about whether they're going to get caught or not. I think they know they're going to get caught. I think they think there's no repercussions from getting caught, and therefore, they go ahead and move. What are they, like what are you going to do to me? Attitude.
Well, but if I have built a good reputation in the public sphere, and I'm a senator or a mayor or a rabbi or whatever, I don't want people going around saying, oh, he stole that money. It's not, I want a good reputation.
But that's just not important to some people, having a good reputation. It's what you do, it's acquiring what they want to acquire, and they don't care about their reputation.
All right, well, I guess so. So the only thing that would actually be a deterrent is if they're going to get sent to jail or something like that. So Netanyahu doesn't care in Israel if people say, his wife spent all that money, hundreds of thousands of government money for private delivery of restaurant bills when they had a full-time chef. He doesn't care as long as it doesn't cause any actual problems, then he doesn't care. That's unfortunate. I would think that you would want people to respect you. I don't know, but
what they did do with that, with the money that and it was pretty well known that it was Sarah that had done this, was that the next campaign where he was running again for prime minister, they did not use her in the campaign at all. It was like she didn't exist for the campaign.
Now they took this to extreme in the next paragraph, which I don't know that we have to read because most of it is repetitive. But there's one thing that the house of Avtinas, and they were the ones responsible for preparing the spices for the temple incense. Remember, we spoke that the temple have incense, which we don't have in our synagogues, although in Catholic churches, I think they do, and in, Eastern religions, they use it. But anyway, you saw what it said about that their daughters were not allowed to wear perfume because they, somebody could say, oh, where did the daughter get such nice perfume? It must come from the father who, diverted some of the spices that were supposed to be used for the temple into making perfume for his daughter. So it's the same idea as burning the fancy restaurant, except here it's not Bernie, it would be Bernie's daughters would not be able to wear perfume.
Well, come on.
And Bernie would say, I can't tell my daughters not to wear perfume as long as the perfume was actually bought with my private funds. These people making these completely spurious accusations need to get a life and stop it. Right, Bernie? Okay, Cy, and then Marcia.
I always thought it was interesting that when when Moses took the Israelis out of Egypt under the conditions he did, and remembering that they were slaves, when his brother had to build the calf, he went to all the refugees, if you will, for gold, and everybody had gold. All the women had golden earrings, the men had golden earrings, and he was able to build a calf, the golden calf.
Right.
This is amazing. Where did all this gold come from suddenly?
I would tell you, but Marcia's listening.
Pam's hand is up.
Pam.
Women just never give up their jewelry, so it's just not done. So even if it's a long trek, they don't give it up.
So you're saying in our congregation, I don't have to worry about if I disappear for a few weeks, that you guys are going to build a golden calf out of your jewelry.
True.
Bernie and Marcia.
Two things. To answer Cy's question, I seem to remember something that we studied a while back that said that the Egyptians actually gave the departing Israelites gold and other treasures as they were leaving.
Right.
And two, the women didn't give up their jewelry for the golden calf, as I recall. It was the men who did, because the women wouldn't.
Women refused.
And the men gave up their big gold chains and stuff. Okay, Marcia and then Steve.
Marcia, you
have to unmute, Marcia.
Nowadays, charitable organizations have to issue reports, so you know how much of their donations, the people donated to them, are actually used for the purpose for which they were donated, and how much went for office supplies and salaries, et cetera, et cetera. So you know whether it's 60% or 90%. And a lot of these corporate charities don't do so well if you look at some of their reports, you know. So Red Cross had it for a while there. I don't know about now, I haven't looked, but for a while they were terrible that way. And even I think that Susan Coleman did okay on, you know, if you looked up their reports, but you can check on people, and people who want to know if their money is going to whatever they donated it to can, you know, find out, you
know. Who is next? Okay, Steve, anything? Okay. Then in the next paragraph, which I don't think we also have to read, that they said that when officials of the temple treasury were taking an offering, they were not allowed to wear clothes that had what type of thing?
Pockets.
No pockets. Like, see, my shirt has no pockets.
Well, but your pants do.
I could wear those sweatpants with no pockets, because you don't want pockets, because pockets you could
hide stuff.
Right.
No shoes either.
You could.
Boy, talk about trust issues.
Well, it's a way of trying to increase public trust. So it's again a symbolic thing. All of this is called in Hebrew, in halacha, marat ayin. Marat is badness. Ayin is of the eye. Marat ayin is things that could be perceived badly. You're not doing anything badly. You're just, it has the potential to be seen as bad. So you try not to, you don't wear pockets on your pants because somebody might say, did you see his left pocket was bulging with something? It looked like money. He's getting all these bribes, or he's stealing all this money from the temple treasury, or he's taking out like spices to make who knows what. Okay, Bernie and then Marcia.
I look at this differently. If I saw this sort of thing going on where people couldn't have pockets and shoes, etc., I'd say, if this is what we see, how bad must it really be? So they're creating a bad perception.
True.
So what are you suggesting, that you shouldn't have where you have to not wear pockets? Because
I think there ought to be a certain amount of trust involved here, and they don't seem to be giving any of that.
and if there's no trust to the point where you shouldn't be wearing pockets, then the problem is so serious that it's not going to help. Because I remember in Albany, Georgia, I went to Sam's Club, and you know, when you leave Sam's Club and Costco, they have a person looking at your receipt and looking in the cart, kind of to make sure you didn't steal stuff. And it turned out one of the managers was stealing, you know, with a few of the employees, was stealing through the back these big ticket items like huge screen TVs. So while they're having in the front checking whether you took an extra cucumber, in the back they're taking out 50 large screen TVs. So it was exactly what Bernie's saying, is that, you know, they were checking carefully in the front for small items, but they had a way to steal big items in large numbers. So something is fundamentally wrong. But many organizations just have fundamental problems that, you know, whether they're financial based or not. Marcia.
So this is not money, but, you know, information is money. Nowadays in the federal government, when there's private, high secret information being shared, people have to leave their cell phones or any of their devices outside of the room, and the room is soundproof, and you can't get anything through there. You know, you can't get information out on what's being heard inside, what's going on inside, because nobody trusts anybody. So nothing changes. It may come to a different technical level, but it doesn't change a lot. So.
But Bernie feels that if you're running a religious organization, there has to be a certain level
You should have a little bit more honesty. One would, a lot more honesty, one would think.
And as we said, there's issues of honesty, and there's issues of spreading slander and based on malice, which are two very different things, but they can be related.
When I was doing temple publicity and I had to pay for an ad in some newsletter, like one of these books that has all the different religious organizations or a town listing, I would never take it on myself to do it by myself. I ran it past the president always. I wanted somebody else to say, this is okay, like you did with the contingency fund, because
because now you wouldn't be accused of being stealing, but you'd be accused of squandering temple funds.
Spending this money wildly. This big ad, and then
so Marcia Gratz spent how much on these stupid ads? Can you believe it? And who authorized her to do that? Nobody.
Right. No, I wasn't dealing with that. And some of those newspaper ads are pricey nowadays. So no, you have to be careful. You have to protect yourself from a bad look about you. Yeah.
Okay, Minya, Babette, Shirley.
I don't know if we don't have a newspaper anymore here, so I can't read it. But I understand on the radio that Walmart is actually closing several of their stores, not right here in Alabama, but in several places. Looks, under,
All right.
they're not, the stores that are not doing well because of pilferage.
Shoplifting.
They are being stolen from,
Walgreens
Totally.
too.
Mo-
They're
more-
looting the store.
they're
They
losing
lock up-
more, they're losing more in pilferage than they are taking in, money.
don't-
Sales.
I heard that that wasn't really true. I heard the report and then I heard that really wasn't true.
Did you really? I haven't heard it anymore, so I don't know if it's true. Like I said, we don't have a newspaper anymore, so it's hard to follow up on these things.
But it is clearly an important commandment not to steal, because you could say, if I take this pen from Walmart and they're such a big company, what difference is it going to make? And then when you hear that whether they're actually closing the stores because of that reason, or whether they're kind of using it as an excuse, partially as an excuse, you don't want to do things that might have unintended consequences. And it's wrong anyway, but it might have consequences. Bernie?
I just reminded me of an anecdote, a story that happened while I was working. There was a man, a tradesman of some sort, of carpenter or a plumber or whatever, was working, and somebody took a tool from his toolkit. And the man said, "Why are you taking that? That's mine." He said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it belonged to the company."
That would make it okay.
Don't I remember not long ago when I believe it was California, that said, as long as you don't, you could steal up, go in and rob a store of up to $999, as long as it was $1,000, and that was okay. Could just walk out with it.
But you have to take your calculator to make sure.
That's right.
That was just for a certain law to pop in. It didn't mean you would not get arrested for less. It was just that it wouldn't be a felony, I guess, is that with a certain amount that causes it to be a felony, I think.
Yeah. I thought,
Bye-bye.
Yeah, Steve.
Okay, I used to have my family used to have a clothing store, and the majority of our losses were going through the back door rather than going through the front door. So a lot of people,
Bobby.
it's hard to do, hard to keep track. That's why we had to install security cameras in the back, because we couldn't, it was just too much.
Before you hire your relatives.
Well, the relatives can steal as well, if not worse.
Right.
Well, I guess it depends what kind of relatives, right? And so I guess that also points up, when you're a small religion and you're just starting out and you're in the desert, everyone's very idealistic and you know people well, and you built and everyone has a very high commitment, then you are more like the family restaurant, that it's one big, group of immigrant family all working together. And then later, when you're a more mature religious group, you have people from all over. They join your temple for all sorts of reasons, and they behave in all sorts of ways. And so it becomes much harder to control not only people's honesty, but also people's, relations with each other. So that's just part of maturing. Marcia.
I just wanted to tell you, some of you may not realize, several years ago, our past president, David Gluck, comes in the temple and says, "What happened to the flag?" We had just bought a brand new American flag and had it up on the flagpole in the front. Someone probably in the dark of night came and they put that flag down and they hung up a ratty old flag, and they went off with our brand new American flag. It was just like, how could somebody do such a thing? It was just, so brazen and terrible, of course, our cameras weren't working, et cetera, as usual. Maybe we didn't have cameras back then, but unbelievable what people will do, so now we don't get the sewn stripes and and embroidered stars, et cetera. We buy a cheapo flag for the front yard, in case someone does it again. Can you imagine that? Come on, and there's this ugly old flag up there. Oh my God.
But if people want to steal, they're gonna steal. And, if people want to gossip about people who didn't steal, they're gonna gossip about people who didn't steal. And so it's very hard to change any of this. The only way is to hang out with just a small group of people that you trust. And even then, the people that you thought were so friendly and such close friends, occasionally they could suddenly, unpredictably turn against you. So there's no guarantees in life. Sigh.
I wonder where you put people who have bad judgment that have lost your money.
Oh, okay. So yes, you give your money to the financial advisor and he's supposed to
That's
be a
like
genius.
stealing.
And then he loses 69% of it in 2 months. And you're like, and he's like, I didn't steal any of it. The market had a bad year. Steve.
Unmute.
Sorry about that. Thank you. We're getting close to the end of our discussion here, plus the end of the book of Exodus. So just keep that in mind. Also, too, the can-do item of the month of March is cereal. So,
What?
cereal.
Cereal. All
So
right.
bring it to the temple and put it in the box, the Valley View Food Bank.
And we had a wonderful tour to the food
That was a
bank.
great tour.
And they so impressed me with their responsibility and efficiency, and they were also really nice.
Very nice.
And it was maybe if there's demand, we could do another one at some point. Bernie?
Did anybody watch on History Channel this past Monday? There's a show called History's Mysteries, and it was devoted to where is the Ark of the Covenant. It was an interesting show. It turns out it could be buried below the Temple Mount. It could be buried in Ireland. It could have burned up. In Ethiopia.
I just want to make it clear, I did not steal it.
Going with Steve Spielberg, it's in
I'm
some.
putting the seeds of doubt in my mind when you say that, though.
Let us conclude with the final blessings, and we can get on with our day.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Baruch
Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan rad et olam notav
Baruch atah Adonai,
notein Torah.
Blessed
Blessed is Adonai our God,
ruler of
the
the
universe,
who has given us the
given us
teaching
teaching
of truth,
truth,
implanting
and
within us
with us
eternal life.
eternal life.
Blessed is Adonai, giver of the Torah. Amen. Hey, everyone, have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you soon.
See you Friday.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Good, though.
Boker Tov.
Okay.